Wyoming Territory, 1879. The sky was burning gold when the stagecoach wheel gave out. Willa Green stood stiff in the tall, dry grass, her skirts dust-streaked, her boots worn to their last breath. The driver's curses trailed off behind her as he kicked at the busted wheel, but she did not turn. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon where the land dipped low toward the Snake River, and beyond that, the last stretch to Fort Bridger. She had come this far alone. 3 weeks out of Illinois, 10 days behind schedule, and now the coach was crippled 30 miles from shelter. "Ma'am, it's too late to go on foot," the driver called. "Next supply wagon won't come through till Wednesday. That's 4 days' wait." "I cannot wait," Willa said without looking back. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "I have work waiting." The driver shook his head and muttered something, but she was already walking. Her satchel was light, 2 dresses, a journal, a small tin of lavender salve she had made herself. Willa had no family left. She had buried her parents in the same week 2 winters past, and every dollar she had saved teaching in Springfield had gone into this journey. The post at Fort Bridger was hers if she arrived before month's end. She walked until the sun set, and her legs screamed. The land was emptier than she had ever imagined. No fences, no homes, just sky and scrub and the sharp cry of hawks overhead. When the sound of a horse startled her from behind, she turned too fast and stumbled. The rider slowed as he approached. He was tall in the saddle, rifle strapped to his back, his hat pulled low. His shirt was patched, his boots scuffed, but his eyes were steady. "You headed east or west, miss?" he asked. "West," Willa said, brushing dust from her skirt. "Fort Bridger." He studied her a moment. "That is not a safe walk for anyone, especially not alone." "I do not have a choice," she said. He swung down from the saddle. "Name's Thayer Abbott." "Willa Green." They shook hands. His grip was warm, calloused. "You always this stubborn, Miss Green?" he asked. "I am always this determined," she corrected. He grinned. "Well, lucky for you, I am headed that way. There is a trapper's cabin near the river. You can rest there. We will ride out at dawn." "I do not ride," she said. "You will tonight," he said, leading his horse toward her. By the time the stars came out, she was perched behind him, arms locked around his waist. She hated the closeness at first, but the warmth of him cut through the cold. They reached the cabin near midnight. It was a rough thing, 1 room, a stone hearth, a cot. Thayer built a fire and handed her a blanket. "You can have the cot," he said. "I will take the floor." "You do not have to." "I do," he said, pulling off his boots. "Sleep." "We ride early." She lay down with her back to the wall, listening to the crackle of fire and the quiet breath of a man who had not asked for anything in return for his help. In the morning, they rode again. By midday, they reached the edge of the Snake River. It was swollen high from snowmelt, the current fast. Willa hesitated. "What is it?" he asked. She pointed. "There, across the river. That trail leads straight to the fort." "Looks that way," he said. "But we are not crossing here. Too deep." Then she saw it. A bear, massive, dark, and lumbering, stood between them and the riverbank, its head low, eyes like coals. Thayer dismounted slow, drawing his rifle. "Stay behind me." The bear huffed, shifting its weight. Willa's heart pounded in her chest. "Thayer, I see it," he said, voice calm. "Do not move. Do not run." The bear took a step forward. Thayer raised the rifle, steady as stone. The bear paused. Another step. He did not shoot. He did not flinch. He stood his ground. The bear let out a low groan. Then, after a moment that stretched forever, turned and lumbered back into the trees. They stood in silence, neither speaking. Then Thayer turned, reached for her hand. "We are crossing here," he said. The bear, "Gone," he said. "But that river is cold and deep. You cannot wade it." "I can try," she said. "I will carry you." Before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms. His chest was solid against her side, his jaw set. She clung to him as he stepped into the freezing water. The current roared around them, but he moved steady, boots gripping the rocky bottom. Halfway through, she tightened her arms around his neck. "You are shaking." "I am fine," he said through gritted teeth. "You will drown," she whispered. "I will not," he said. "I said I would get you across." And he did. When they reached the far bank, he did not set her down right away. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She nodded. "You saved my life." He looked at her, close now, his face inches from hers. "You have no idea what you are starting in me, Willa Green," he said. Her heart skipped. "Maybe I do," she said quietly. He finally set her down, slow and careful. They made it to Fort Bridger that night, just as the sun dipped behind the trees. Willa turned to him at the gates. "You could ride on. You do not owe me anything." He looked at her like she had lost her mind. "I am not going anywhere," Thayer said. "Not without you." And for the first time since her parents died, Willa felt safe. Not because she had reached the fort, because he was standing beside her. The first morning light pushed through the frost-laced window panes of the boarding house, drawing pale gold across the wool blankets tucked around Willa's legs. She sat upright on the narrow cot, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug of weak coffee that tasted more like burnt water than anything else. Her body ached from the ride and the river crossing, but a quiet steadiness had settled in her chest, strange and unfamiliar. Outside, the fort stirred. Wagons creaked, boots struck packed earth, and a dog barked once, then went quiet. She heard hammering from the smithy and the low murmur of men starting their long day. It was a different rhythm than any she'd known before, rougher, slower, but honest. Thayer stood near the stove, his coat slung over one shoulder, hair still damp from washing. His voice broke the silence. "Got a proper breakfast waitin' at the canteen, if you're hungry." "I will be," she said, setting the mug down. "Once my legs remember what standing feels like." He gave a short nod, then leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes sweeping over the small room. "I asked the quartermaster. Says the schoolhouse sits empty, same as when the last teacher left. You'll need to fetch a key from the chaplain." "I'd like to see it today," she said, "before the children come. No one's expecting them for 2 more days. You'll have time." She pulled her shawl tighter, then looked up. "Why are you still here?" He didn't look away. "Because I want to be." She stood slowly, brushing her skirt smooth. "I've never had a man stay without asking for something." "I'm not that kind," he said. She believed him. Later, when the sun warmed the rutted paths between buildings and the smell of iron and horses filled the air, they walked together toward the chapel. The chaplain was a thin, bearded man with tired eyes and kind hands. He placed the key into Willa's palm without question, as if he had been waiting. The schoolhouse stood on the far edge of the fort, near a low fence that bordered open prairie. The roof sagged slightly, and dust coated the windows, but the bones of it were sound. Inside, the benches were lined up in 2 neat rows, untouched since the last lessons had faded from the room. A slate still hung on the wall, a faint equation chalked in one corner. Willa ran her fingers over the wood of the teacher's desk. "It's not much. It's yours," Thayer said. She turned. "You've done a great deal for someone you just met." He shifted his weight. "You remind me of someone." She waited. "My sister, Ruth. She taught down in Kansas before the fever came through. She had your same look, like she'd seen too much, but still meant to get on with it." "I'm sorry," Willa said. He nodded once. "She would have liked you." That night, Willa sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching the last of the daylight stretch across the field. The fort behind her quieted, the workday done. Thayer came from the direction of the stables, brushing hay from his sleeves. "You always sit alone?" he asked, easing down beside her. "Not always," she said. "Only when I'm trying to remember who I am." He didn't press, just offered her a piece of dried apple from his pocket. She chewed slowly. "I was engaged once. Back home. A banker's son. He wanted a wife who'd stay put. You didn't. I wanted a life that felt like mine." He nodded, staring out toward the open land. "That's why I left Missouri. Couldn't stand the feeling of being cornered." They sat in silence until the wind turned cooler. Willa's shoulder brushed his when she leaned back on her hands. He didn't move away. "I won't pretend I know what this is," she said. "I wasn't going to ask for anything you weren't ready to give." She looked at him, then not for the first time, but with something new settling behind her ribs. "I think I'd like to find out what it could be." He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "Then I'll stay close. However you need." She didn't answer, just let her hand rest beside his, close enough to feel the warmth of his skin. The stars came out one by one, and neither of them moved. On the 3rd morning, Willa stood inside the schoolhouse with a broom in her hands and a streak of coal dust across her cheek. The door was propped open to let the late spring air roll through, carrying the scent of pine pitch and horses. She had already scrubbed the windows and swept out 2 mouse nests from behind the wood stove. Her back ached, but the ache felt honest. Thayer arrived near midday, leading a pack mule loaded with a crate and bundles wrapped in oilskin. He stepped aside so she could see. "Brought some things from the supply yard," he said. "Ink, chalk, slates. They had a few readers left from last winter." She set the broom aside. "They gave you all that?" "Traded a cord of split pine and helped the cook mend his trap line." "Fair trade." She crossed the room, fingers brushing the edge of the crate. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, untying the bundles. She crouched beside him, peeling back the cloth. Inside were books, some with cracked leather spines, a few stitched by hand. She touched a page gently, like it might vanish if she pressed too hard. "Did you read much growing up?" she asked. He gave a quiet laugh. "Only what I could reach. My mother taught me letters." Said a man with a sharp mind could carry more than any mule. Willa looked up. "What happened to her?" He kept his eyes on the crate. "Got sick after my father passed. There wasn't enough food that winter. I was 15. She didn't speak right away. The silence between them had grown easier, not something to fill, but something to share. When she finally stood, she said, "I'll need benches mended before Monday. Can you help?" Already set a few boards aside. That evening, as the wind picked up and clouds thickened over the ridge, they walked the perimeter of the schoolhouse together, measuring spots for a garden plot. Thayer pointed to a patch near the fence. "South-facing. Holds sun longer. I could plant cabbage. Maybe carrots." He nodded. "You'll need fencing. Elk come through sometimes." She tilted her head. "You planning to build it?" "I was," he said. Lightning cracked far off to the west, silent for a long breath before the roll of thunder followed. They didn't hurry toward shelter. Instead, Willa paused by the fence rail and looked out where the prairie stretched wide and dim. "I used to think quiet was something to fear, like it meant no one was coming for you." Thayer stepped beside her. "And now I think it's a kind of peace." He didn't speak, just rested his hand on the rail close to hers, not touching, but near enough to feel. Rain started slow, big drops spaced wide. They walked back without speaking, clothes damp by the time they reached the boarding house. She turned to him beneath the porch eave, water running from her hair. "I saved a slice of bread," she said. "Fresh, baked it myself. You want it?" He smiled faintly. "Only if you sit with me while I eat it." Inside, they sat across from each other, a lamp burning low between them. She passed him the bread wrapped in cloth. His hands were rough, but careful as he broke it in half and gave her the larger piece. She watched him chew, then asked, "What did you think would happen when you first saw me out there?" "Didn't think. Just knew I wasn't leaving you behind. Even if the bear hadn't turned, I'd done what I had to." She looked down, then back up. "I wasn't sure you'd stay." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. This time, she reached for his hand. Not tentative, not uncertain. "I want you to be here, Thayer. Not because I need you, but because I see something in you that's worth building toward." His grip closed around hers, steady and strong. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. And in the quiet between them, something old and wounded softened. Something that had waited a long time to be named finally found its place. By late April, the wind carried the scent of thawed earth and pine sap, and the days stretched long enough that Willa could hold lessons without lamplight. The children came in handfuls, ranchers' sons with scraped knuckles, daughters of laundresses who whispered when they read aloud. She kept a firm tone but a kind eye, and by the end of the first week, no one tried to test her twice. Thayer didn't linger at the schoolhouse. He brought supplies when needed, fixed the broken hinge on the back door, and left without fuss. But each evening, he returned to walk her back to the boarding house, his gait easy, his voice low if he spoke at all. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just moved side by side while the prairie cooled and the last birds quieted. One evening, she stopped short halfway to her steps. "There's a parcel under the stoop," she said. Thayer bent to lift it, tied with twine and wrapped in canvas. "Your name's written here." She took it from his hands, unwrapped it slow. Inside was a worn leather-bound volume, The Wide, Wide World. She ran her thumb along the spine. "This was my mother's favorite," she said, voice quieter than usual. "I'd read it to her when her hands got too stiff to turn the pages." Thayer watched her face. "You think someone sent it from home?" "There's no one left to send it." She looked up. "But I had a copy once." I sold it before leaving Springfield. He frowned. You sure it's the same one? She opened to the front leaf. A faded penciled note in her mother's hand read, "For Willa, when the world feels too wide." Her breath caught. I sold this to a bookseller on Jefferson Street. He must have passed it along, and somehow it found its way west. Maybe it was looking for you, Thayer said. She didn't speak again until they were seated by the stove inside. The book lay on her lap, her fingers resting on the cover. I've never believed in signs, she said carefully. But this feels like something more than chance. Thayer leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I think the world's full of quiet things trying to lead us where we're meant to be. She met his eyes. Do you think that's what this is? You and me. He didn't shift or look away. I think some people are made to find each other, even if they start out 1,000 miles apart. She let that sit between them for a moment. Then, without hesitation, she reached across and took his hand, thumb brushing the back of it, slow and steady. When I first saw you by that river, she said, I thought you were a man who knew what he stood for. I still do, but I also see who you are when no one's watching. And who's that? Someone who doesn't take more than he gives. Someone who's never expected a single thing from me, but offers what he can anyway. He looked down at their joined hands. I don't want to give you just pieces, Willa. I want to give you the whole of it. I don't need perfect, she said. I just need true. He nodded once, tight. She could see the knot in his throat, the way his jaw worked just slightly before he spoke again. There's a plot of land north of the river. Not much, just a cabin frame and a well that needs digging. I've been putting it off. She watched him closely. Why? Didn't know what I'd be building it for. But I do now. Her breath came slow. You're sure? I've been sure since the bear turned back, he said. And I carried you across that river like it was the only thing on earth that mattered. She stood then, still holding his hand, and drew him up with her. Then we'll build it, she said. Not for shelter, for a life. He stepped closer, the lamplight catching the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. You'll marry me? Yes, she said. When the roof's up and the garden's in. We'll do it right. He wrapped his arms around her, slow and strong, and she rested her head beneath his chin, listening to the rhythm of his breath, steady like the land beneath them. Outside, the wind picked up, but the fire held, and inside that small room, with his arms around her and her fingers still resting on the cover of her mother's book, Willa felt the shape of a future take root. Not certain, but real, and real was enough. June came with a gentler sun and a stretch of dry days that let the roof timbers go up without delay. Willa stood barefoot in the grass, skirts pinned at the knees, handing Thayer a wrapped iron nail from a tin she'd bartered off a traveling merchant. The outline of the cabin had taken shape beneath their hands' pine frame, riverstone hearth, a porch deep enough to sit under when the rain started. You think it'll hold through a windstorm? She asked, shading her eyes with the back of her wrist. Thayer leaned against a beam, wiping sweat from his brow with the edge of his sleeve. I built fence through 3 winters in the Bighorns. If this frame doesn't hold, I'll tear it down myself and start again. She smiled, not because she doubted him, but because he said it without pride, just plain certainty. The garden had begun to green. Rows of cabbage leaves curled from the soil, and the carrot shoots were shoulder high to the youngest students now. Willa had taken to bringing a few of the older girls after lessons to help water and weed. They were quiet, careful workers, and she paid them in slices of honey loaf and time with her books. Thayer had taken a job managing the remount horses for the fort quartermaster. It meant early mornings, but he was home before dusk each day, hands smelling of leather and dust. Willa met him at the path with a basin and a clean towel, and they took their suppers on the porch, knees brushing under the table they'd built together from salvaged barn wood. You ever think, she said one evening as he whittled a latch for the cellar door, what it would have been like if we hadn't met out there? If the coach hadn't broken down? He didn't look up. I don't think on things that didn't happen. She waited. But I reckon, he said after a moment, I'd still have ended up here. Might have taken longer. Might have wandered a while more. But I think I would have found this place. Found you. She reached for one of his shavings, curled like a ribbon, and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. I want to marry you before the frost comes. He set the knife down. Then we'll do it before the leaves turn. They were married in late September, under the cottonwoods at the bend in the river. The preacher's wife lent Willa a lace collar. and Thayer's shirt was pressed smooth with a hot stone. The children from the school brought flowers, wild and mismatched, and the cook from the fort sent down a ham wrapped in oilcloth. There was no music, but someone brought a fiddle, and by the time the stars came out, half the fort had gathered near the schoolhouse for stew and biscuits. Willa stood with her hand tucked into Thayer's elbow, watching the girls dance barefoot in the dust. "I never imagined this," she said, her voice low so only he could hear. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "I did. Maybe not the details, but the feel of it. The rightness." They moved into the cabin that night. The hearth still held warmth from the afternoon fire, and the quilt Willa had stitched from old dresses and feed sacks lay folded at the foot of the bed. Thayer lit a single candle, its glow soft against the wood-planked walls. She turned to him, hair unpinned, lips parted slightly. "I've never shared a bed with anyone," she said. "I have," he answered, voice gentle. "But never like this. Never with someone I wanted to wake beside every day after." She stepped into his arms, and he held her like something he'd waited his whole life to deserve. That winter was lean, but not hard. They kept chickens, traded eggs for flour, and Willa taught the children by the warmth of the stove. Thayer built a second outbuilding, and when the snow came deep, he carved paths from the porch to the schoolhouse so she wouldn't slip. They read aloud most nights, her head on his shoulder, his hand around her waist. She mended his shirts. He built her a bookshelf. In spring, the carrots came in thick and sweet. Willa added a third bench to the schoolhouse to fit the new students whose families had arrived through the mountain pass. Thayer repaired the roof on the chapel and started gathering stone for a smokehouse. One evening, he returned from the ridge with a small parcel in his coat. He placed it in her hand without a word. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a deed to the land the cabin sat on. "I sold the last of my claim in Missouri," he said. "Didn't need it anymore. This is ours now." She looked down at the paper, then back at him. "You've given me more than land." "I know," he said, "but this you can hold in your hands." She kissed him then, slow and certain. Years passed. The schoolhouse grew by another room. The garden spread past the fence line. Willa's hair turned silver at the edges, and Thayer's hands grew slower, but no less steady. They built a life full of quiet mornings and shared burdens, of warmth in the cold and laughter when the world allowed. And every night, no matter the season, they lay down in the bed they'd built together, hands still finding each other beneath the quilt, hearts still steady, still home.